Hello, two things to keep in mind. Every year, the nation as a whole keeps on getting fatter and fatter. They measure obesity rates, even in children, and every year they decide or they measure that people are becoming fatter and bigger. In other words, the nation as a whole is getting fatter. And yet, everybody can recite the idea that in order to lose weight, you have to exercise or exercise more. Now, it's no surprise you drive around any town and every corner there's one or two gyms of different types, and you see people jogging on the street, and something is a little bit amiss there. If in order to lose weight you have to exercise, and you look at the size of the exercise industry in this country, and it is growing every year, different forms of exercises come up and people are exercising more and more and more. How come it is that overall the nation as a whole is getting fatter? Hi, my name is Flavio Ballerini. I've been a hypnotherapist for 21 years. I have helped thousands of people adjust their weights and go into what I call their ideal weight without dieting and actually with very little exercise, or at least not initially. And I'd like to explain to you why it is that we say that in order to lose weight, we should not exercise. I know it's contrary to popular wisdom and even the scientific ideas, but watch, this is absolutely true. The problem with excess weight, in other words, you cannot gain weight. Your body cannot make fat, cannot accumulate fat in the fat cells. In other words, we cannot grow the adipose tissues. We cannot become fatter unless we have excess nutrition. So when I say excess nutrition, we're really talking about the balance between intake and outtake. In other words, depending on your physical and mental level of activity, you need a certain amount of fuel, just like a car. In other words, think of a car. If you're going to drive, 200 miles, and to do that trip, your car gets 20 miles a gallon, let's say, so you're going to need about, 10 gallons of gas, and your tank happens to hold 10 gallons in this particular vehicle. You would stop at a gas station, and if your tank were empty, you would put 10 gallons of gas. If you put the 10 gallons in this example and you travel the 200 miles, you're going to end the trip with your tank empty and everything is in balance there. Now imagine your tank can only hold 10 gallons, but you decide to pump in 20 gallons. Well, the excess gasoline has to go somewhere. Imagine now that you have this tray that picks up the excess gasoline that cannot go into the tank, and this gasoline is accumulated somewhere. That's the excess energy. But if you pick up 10 more gallons of gas after you've driven the 200 miles in this example, then there's no problem, you see? So it's the balance between what we take in and what we spend that will determine whether the body accumulates excess nutrition in the form of fat. And now you already knew that. So what am I really saying here? So people say, well, if you want to lose weight, we're gaining weight as a nation. If you want to lose weight, you got to eat less and exercise more. But those two things come together. People always say that together. Well, just exercise, just change your diet and exercise. And people repeat this over and over. Now, in my 21 years experience, everybody who has come here with the notion of exercising has actually gained weight, not lost. And here's what happens. The body works really hard. The brain, there's a little piece of the brain, a little part of the brain called the hypothalamus. The hypothalamus has the function of keeping everything the same. We call this homeostasis. It doesn't matter if the person is fat, what the brain tries to do. In other words, the brain doesn't really seem to like changes, let's put it this way. So, if the person begins, let's say a person starts off being overweight and they decide, okay, this is the first of the year, let's just assume, right, that this is like a New Year's resolution and they want to lose weight, so they say, okay, I'm going to lose weight and I'm going to eat less and exercise more. We throw the brain into a spin. It's like, okay, now I have fewer calories to deal with and I'm exercising, so I'm spending more. For a few days, the brain will play along with you, but after a few days, your appetite will increase and you're going to eat a whole lot. Now you have a whole lot of motivation, you're going to continue exercising for a few more days, but because your energy expenditure went up, your appetite also goes up, and as a result, you're not going to lose weight initially. So after a few weeks of exercising, waking up at 4 in the morning, running in the rain, and realizing that you haven't lost in weight, in fact, you have gained, and the reason why you have gained is because you're now eating more. You see, so the person then loses motivation to exercise. They say, dude, I'm doing all of this and it's not working. I'm not losing weight. I'm still gaining weight. Exercise is not the answer. So they drop the exercise. But now that they drop the exercise, they've gotten used to eating actually more calories. So they indeed gain even more weight. And each time they go through a cycle of gaining weight, what really happens there is that we gain more fat. And the composition of the body begins to change, and we become flabbier, weaker, we begin to lose balance depending on the age, and it's a serious, serious problem. So at some point, very few people will tell you the truth like this because, people want to be popular or whatever, so they won't tell you this. The real problem with excess weight is food addiction. Addiction, just like, you hear the word addiction, you think of drugs and alcohol. I never understood that, to be honest with you. I never understood how alcohol is in a separate category from drugs. I'm not sure what that means. People say, well, drugs and alcohol, as though they were two different things. Well, drugs and alcohol are in the same category. Drugs, right? I mean, how can alcohol not be considered a drug? I don't know, but it is. So you have this drug addictions, and this is what people are used to thinking of when they think of addictions, and it's difficult to think of an addiction to food. Now, there are two ways in which we use food. We use food for nutrition, and in nutrition, we have to consider two categories there. We need to acquire minerals and essential amino acids and certain nutrients in large quantities and in small quantities that the body requires to sustain life, to sustain the integrity of the body. In other words, if we're not taking in a particular kind of mineral, let's just say calcium, for example. If you're not taking in enough calcium, because we're losing calcium every day through different means, so if you're not taking in, if you're not replacing the calcium, the body has stores of calcium, of a little bit of stores in the bones, but eventually, if we really don't have any, the body has to actually begin to pull it from other tissues, typically bones, to replace the calcium that is missing elsewhere. It's got to come from somewhere. If it's not coming from the diet, it's going to come from somewhere else. So if we're not taking in those micronutrients, those minerals and those vitamins, some sort of tissue is going to be broken down to remove the parts, you see, so that the body can use it in areas that it finds more essential. So when we talk about nutrition, we have to think of getting adequate nutrition, meaning all of the phytonutrients, all of the minerals, all of the vitamins, all of the stuff is important. And then you have the fuel, in other words, enough calories to sustain the activity of the person. So that's nutrition. And for the average person in this country who's not an athlete or who's not a person who's working, perhaps loading trucks all day, whatever the case is, for the average person, it's not a whole lot of nutrition. You don't need a lot. Evidence for that is the fact that the nation as a whole is fat. So the other part of what we eat is not nutrition, it's addiction. In other words, we use food because we're addicted to the process of eating, and we eat in excess. So that excess food, the one beyond what we need to live, to survive, to move, and to think, that is what eventually the body says, okay, I don't know, I don't need this right now. Oh, okay, don't worry, accumulate it as fat. And if you think about it from the perspective of the body, accumulating fat makes a whole lot of sense. In fact, anthropologists tell us that we, the people who survived this population, these people who live here today, or this segment of the human population, is here precisely because we survived famine. You see, for most of human history, humanity had the opposite problem. The problem was to keep weight on because food was not as available as it is today. So because food was sparingly available, in other words, sometimes we have it, sometimes we don't. If you think of a nomadic society, people, if you think of hunters, gatherers, they go and hunt, and when we do hunt, we have food for a few days, but then the food runs out, then we might have to go days without food. So the people who are not able to accumulate fat are not able to survive. And so those who did survive are those who are more genetically predisposed to actually making fat out of excess food and store it for the times when we have famine. But in our modern culture, at least in the last 50, 60 years, there hasn't really been a famine, thank God. and therefore, food is more and more available, in some ways cheaper, not necessarily high quality food, but the high calorie food is cheaply available, and so what happens is that the body is saying, okay, I got a few extra calories here, let me accumulate this as fat for tomorrow. Well, tomorrow we have a few more extra calories, and we keep on accumulating more and more and more. Now, you tell me, I'm not sure about, I'm feeling a little offended right now, when you're telling me that I'm addicted. I didn't know I had an addiction. I just came here to lose weight, and what's up with this addiction business, And I say, well, let me ask you a question. Forget about this conversation we're having for a moment. What do you know about addiction? What is the central feature of any addiction? You've seen this in the movies, you've seen this in the culture, maybe, unfortunately, a family member, a friend, What do you know about addiction? And again, typically people refer to addictions in the context of drugs, right? And they say, well, I've read something about the 12 steps, and I know something about recovery, and I've heard a neighbor of mine that was an alcoholic, and they talk a whole lot about denial. And I say, denial? What's that? And they say, well, denial, they use the drug, but they deny it to themselves. They don't see the reality of how their lives is being ruined by the drug, right? Say, okay, denial is the central feature of addiction. Let's see if that fits the model here. How can a person be 100 pounds overweight? Tell me that it's not about denial. In other words, in order to be 100 pounds overweight, the person has to be 1 pound overweight, 2 pounds overweight, 3 pounds overweight, 4, 5, 6. By the time you're 10 or 20 pounds, 30 pounds overweight, all of your clothes have to be thrown away and new clothes have to be purchased. In other words, your whole life has been changing, and this person hasn't taken stock of the situation and said, okay, something is going on. I'm eating too much. Let me make a change in my life. That is denial. There's some fundamental feature in the person's mind that is not recognizing the reality that they're actually gaining weight year after year. So the concept of food addiction makes sense in the context of being overweight and obese. Now, this is not to be offensive or anything, because I'm a therapist. I'm here to serve and to help. What I'm saying is, exercise, when a person finally takes stock of their situation and they say, okay, I realize I've gained too much weight. Perhaps I've been to my doctor, perhaps I've been told I'm pre-diabetic, diabetic, I have metabolic syndrome, I have all these different things that come up, or maybe full-blown diabetes. I have all of these complications now from weight, and it is time to do something about it. So they told me to eat less and exercise more. I'm going to sign up for the gym, and I'm going to wake up at 4 in the morning and go exercise for 2 hours every day. It sounds like a good idea. It sounds like it's the right advice. Your doctor will tell you to do that. So you do that, and you get back home at 7 in the morning after exercising for 2 hours, and you can eat a whole cow. I mean, your appetite is going through the roof, and you're going to be eating a whole lot. And as a result, you won't lose the weight. You see, because you increase your activity level, but you also increase your food intake. So initially, you will not lose the weight. And what happens when you begin a whole new exercise routine and you sacrifice and you wake up early and you sweat and you don't see the results? Because after all, you didn't go in there for general fitness, you went in there for weight loss. So if the weight is not coming off, even though, you see, it's not coming off for different reasons. One of the reasons why it's not coming off is because if you're seriously working out, you're actually putting on muscle. And so the balance between the additional muscle tissue and the additional appetite and a little bit of fat loss is that the balance is that the weight actually does not come down, and in some cases it actually goes up when you begin exercising like that, for the reasons that I just explained. So the person loses motivation. They go, dude, it's not working. So they come back here into the office and they say, no, we're not going to exercise. People come here. I've been doing this for 21 years. People lose weight here. But the first thing I tell them, now, if you are already exercising, if that has been your routine for years, for a while, that's one story. But if you're not exercising and you want to lose weight, now is not the time to exercise. Because what the exercise is going to do is it's going to mask and hide the true food addiction. We're not going to find out what the addiction is, and we're not going to be able to cure it. So the first thing we're going to do is solve the actual problem, which is we're going to solve the food addiction. We're going to get you to eat less naturally. In other words, we're going to get you to eat less and not suffer about it. We're going to teach you, and we're going to help you through hypnosis to say, thank you, but no thank you. And the moment you can step away from food with a smile on your face and say thank you, but no thank you, I'm satisfied. The moment that you begin to step away from food with a feeling of satisfaction without having eaten it, you see, the satisfaction in this case does not come from eating the food, it comes from not eating the food. And when you can feel the pleasure, when you can feel the satisfaction, your whole life begins to change. We finally solved the cause of the problem. Now you begin to eat less. Now you are losing weight. What do we do now? Now we add the exercise, not so much to enhance weight loss, because we don't want to lose weight too fast. 1 to 2% of body weight a week is more than enough. We don't want to go too fast because we don't want the brain to panic, like, oh, we're losing too much weight. We don't want the brain to panic because then appetite goes through the roof. So the reason why we go to the gym, the reason why we exercise once we solved the food addiction problem is to tone up the body, to build up muscle tissue, because the person who has been overweight for a long time, particularly if they're an older person, an adult, let's say, then the muscle has atrophied. You know, there's something called age-related sarcopenia, which is a natural muscle loss. Even if you are exercising, let's say, just with age alone, some muscle tissue is lost naturally. It's called sarcopenia. So if you on top of that, we become less active, more sedentary as age goes on, then of course we're going to lose a whole lot of weight, a whole lot of muscle, I'm sorry. But you may not notice that because simultaneous to losing muscle, we're gaining fat. So the body from the outside, it doesn't seem to change size too much, even though kind of the composition of the body has changed and the shape and the flabbiness of it has changed. But the person says, no, I'm okay. The same shirt still fits. Yeah, but they have way less muscle and way more fat, so they become weaker. Now, weakness is a big problem both for men and women. For instance, have you noticed that osteoporosis, in other words, bone problems, are more common in women than in men? Now, there's a whole bunch of reasons for this, medical reasons. I'm not going to get into that right now, but I will tell you this. And remember, my first profession was as a biomedical engineer. If you look at a piece of bone, right, the question is, what makes this bone strong? Well, bone is made out of several things, but primarily a mineral called hydroxyapatite. And in order for the body to synthesize that mineral, there's some cells in the bone called osteoblasts, and they actually make this tissue. You need a molecule of calcium. You need calcium. Everybody knows this, right? You need calcium. Now, what does it take for bone to uptake calcium and actually deposit this mineral? In other words, what does it take for the bone to make more bone? Because you got to remember something. Everything in the body is being torn down and replaced simultaneously. So bone is not like a piece of concrete on a building that just sits there. No, the body is always tearing down the bone and building new bone. So when we're healthy, the rate of tearing down bone and the rate of making new bone is about the same, so the bone seems to be the same. But as a person gets older, if they're not building up as much bone as they're tearing down, the net result is that the bone becomes smaller, thinner, more fragile, less dense, weaker, and more brittle, which means that any little fall can cause a major fracture, which is a huge problem. Particularly in the hip area, it's a huge problem because it can affect internal organs. I mean, it's a huge problem. Question is, why, among different reasons, there are hormonal reasons, there are genetic reasons, but among other reasons, what is one reason why ladies are more predisposed to this problem than men? And I'll tell you exactly what it is. It's really simple. If you look at a piece of tissue, male or female, doesn't matter, bone tissue, the only way the body can actually put the mineral in there and make the bone stronger is if you have flexion, if you have a little bit of strain. If the bone is actually working, if the bone is actually doing something, carrying a load, straining. So since ladies in our culture are typically not allowed to carry anything, their bones become weaker by lack of use. Now, this happens to be a true fact, what I just told you, but if you're not quite convinced, don't worry about it. You don't have to spend hours looking it up. Just think of this. You've heard of this before. What happens to astronauts when they spend a whole bunch of days or weeks or months out in space where there's no gravity? You see, if there's no gravity, they don't carry any weight. They all lose height. They all lose bone. So they spend a number of hours in space exercising vigorously to try to maintain bone mass, but breathe around. See if they figured out how to make those guys keep bone density in space, even with exercise. There's no substitute for gravity, for actually carrying things, doing things, moving. You see, if the bone is not straining, if we're not using the bone, if the bone is not serving the purpose of keeping the body in some way, moving the body, then the bone is going to say, well, guess what? I'm not needed as a rigid organ, so let me get rid of this calcium, and the bone begins to decrease. So the point I'm making here is that in the case of older ladies who are not carrying anything, oh, because she's so fragile, don't let her do anything. Well, we're going to make the problem worse. So the thing that I'm saying here to you is that there's a cultural norm of actually making problems worse. As the person gets older, what they actually need is to carry more things, do more things, become more active, because there's a natural tendency for these things to go away, for the muscles to atrophy, for us to lose muscle tissue, and for the bones to become less dense. Serious problem in older age. So in our culture, we say, okay, no, since you're getting older, don't carry anything, let me help you. Exactly the wrong thing to do. Since you're getting older, make sure you carry something, make sure you're moving those bones so that you can put calcium in them. In other words, there will be no bone growth unless there's flexion. Let me tell you another example, and I know I'm getting off the topic here, but I'm just giving you an example of how this is true. I gave you the example of the astronauts just for you to intuitively know that it's true. You got to actually bend those bones a little bit. When I say bend the bones, be careful. What I mean is the natural use of our body is what strains the bones a little bit. So when a person goes to the gym and lifts weight for several years, they don't just grow muscle. If you look at their bones, they're much bigger than they were before. The bones grow as well. So there was this one study that they published several years ago looking at graves of Native Americans. And they compared graves, there were people who died, the Native Americans who died before the Spanish got here and after the Spanish got here. And they measured the average diameter of the arm bone. And they found that if you look at people who died, let's say up to 50 years before the Spanish got here, their arm bones were much thinner, much smaller than those who died, let's say, 50 years after the Spanish got here, which proves that after the Spanish got here, these people were working hard because the bones actually grew. So whether they were slaves or not, enslaved or not by the Spanish, is up for the historians to determine, but anthropologically and from a biological point of view and from a measurement point of view, their arm bones have grown, which indicates that the only way to grow the bone is for you to strain them, for you to carry things. So they were doing some heavy labor right there. Whether they were made to be slaves or not, I don't know, but they were doing heavy labor. So the point is that when we do labor, when we carry things, when we do labor, bones grow. And what does culture tell you? Well, don't let her lift anything. Don't let her walk. Don't let her do anything because she's old. See, quite the opposite. What we got to do is do something to get bone mass and bone density. Same thing goes for weight loss. They say, well, you got to go exercise. All right, you have a food addiction. You start exercising, you will eat more and you'll gain weight. Don't do that. I've been doing this for a long, long time, and people come here, they lose weight. What you got to do is we got to target this food addiction first. Once you get that under control, and I'm telling you, and I'm repeating myself because this is important, you will know that you took care of the food addiction when you can walk away from your favorite foods, from your comfort foods, with a smile on your face, saying thank you, but no thank you. When you do that, you know that you took care of it. Now exercise becomes valid, not so much for weight loss, but to enhance your body, to make your body stronger and more agile and so forth. We'll talk more about this, and I'm so glad that to have this opportunity with you. We're going to get to the bottom of this so that we can all be healthier, trimmer, and please, the most important thing here, I put some time into this recording for you. I need and I beg you and I ask you to leave me your comments so that we can develop a dialogue, so that I can know what you're thinking and what sort of message, what sort of lessons you would like to share with me. Because after 21 years and well over 30,000 sessions, I learned a couple things about the mind and about certain habits and so forth, and I'm eager to share them with you. So if you tell me what's on your mind, I think we can develop a dialogue that's going to be quite interesting. Thank you so much.